In the last couple of videos, we've spent a lot of time talking in some detail about the careers of Michael Jackson, Madonna, Prince, and Janet Jackson. In this video, we're going to move much more quickly through a number of other artists that also had success on MTV. And like I said, starting out this discussion this week, because of the initial shortage of videos at the beginning of MTV, many groups benefited from MTV exposure who might not otherwise have gotten that level of attention in the United States, but they had videos ready to roll, and MTV was 24/7 at a period, I don't think I've said this up to this point, but at a period where it's hard to believe MTV actually played music videos. There were no reality shows on MTV until many, many years later. At first, MTV was just a channel that just rolled videos nonstop. There were video DJs who came on and talked about the videos, but mostly you were watching videos the entire time. There were no television shows, no cartoons. There was nothing like that. It was just videos, and you had to have a lot of them to fill up 24/7. And so a lot of these groups who otherwise wouldn't have had much attention, because they came from England and because it was part of their usual marketing to prepare a video, had videos, and so they went with it. So groups that you can think of that form what might almost be called a kind of second British invasion. Groups like Bow Wow Wow, Adam and the Ants, A Flock of Seagulls, Howard Jones, Thomas Dolby, ABC, all of these groups, lots of videos in rotation. Those of you who were around watching MTV back in those days can definitely attest to the fact that these guys got some pretty heavy rotation on MTV. One of the best of these groups was a group out of Birmingham in the UK called Duran Duran, who kind of blended together synthesizer, sort of synth pop with guitar-heavy new wave music, sort of driven by infectious dance beats. Good examples of Duran Duran is their 1982 hit Hungry Like the Wolf, or their 1984 hit, The Reflex. Another interesting group out of the UK, Culture Club, fronted by Boy George, who was pretty gender ambivalent. I talked a bit about Prince being somewhat androgynous, but Boy George really was pretty much a guy dressed up like a woman, but obviously so. In other words, he wasn't trying to fool anybody. You were supposed to get that that's what it was. Interesting, again, we're coming back to some of the things that were explored by David Bowie and others during the 1970s. Anyway, some great music. 1982, Do You Really Want to Hurt Me was in heavy MTV rotation. Karma Chameleon in 1983, that was a big hit, #1 both in this hit in this country, the United States, and in the UK. Culture Club really definitely had their moment. Maybe on a more kind of intellectual approach to sort of MTV pop, Eurythmics, featuring synthesizer, composer, keyboard guy Dave Stewart, and vocalist Annie Lennox, coming out of London. They really combined a kind of synth pop sound. Synth pop is that the sort of dance music that's very much dominated by synthesizer sounds and maybe a drum machine. And so that synth pop sound, they combined that with some very soulful vocals by Annie Lennox, really sort of coming out of the tradition of 60s soul and 70s soul. Fantastic, sort of deep, expressive, very wide-ranging and interesting kind of voice. Maybe the two best representative examples for them from 1983, Sweet Dreams Are Made of This. If you listen to the full studio version of that, some fantastic singing by Annie Lennox on that. And then 1984's Here Comes the Rain Again. Sweet Dreams Are Made of This, as I recall, had a video that was that juxtaposed an executive boardroom, like a corporate boardroom, with a farmer's field with cows in it. So the idea will be, what would happen if you had an executive boardroom meeting in a field? What would happen alternatively if you had cows in an executive boardroom? And so already starting to get ambitious with the use of images in these videos, and we're talking about 1983 here, so just about the time that Michael Jackson is coming along with a Thriller video. Coming also out of the UK, Tears for Fears, their name influenced by the primal scream therapy of Arthur Janoff, featuring Roland Orzabal and Kurt Smith. These were serious tracks that that had serious lyrics, complicated music, sometimes longer tracks. Not their first album, but their most successful one in this country was 1985's Songs from the Big Chair, #1 in the US, #2 in the UK. The two big hits on that album being Everybody Wants to Rule the World at #1 here, and Shout at #1 here. That album, Songs from the Big Chair, really was the moment for Tears for Fears. And again, all of these groups I'm talking about in heavy rotation on MTV, and I haven't mentioned one who has whose sort of moment in the sun came after about 1985, right? So this initial period from August of '81, those first few years, a lot of these groups had an opportunity while the American music business was sort of gearing up and finding out that these videos could actually sell some records. Let's take a little bit of time here to talk for a minute about girl groups and their rise in the 1980s and as part of the MTV generation. And by girl groups, I don't really mean the same thing as girl groups going back to the early 1960s, although in many ways there are a lot of important similarities. These are groups, rock, new wave mostly, dance beat oriented new wave groups that the personnel of which is entirely women, right? So to a certain extent they're girl groups, but not just girls sort of singing out in front, but girls playing drums and bass and guitars and that kind of thing. The two important ones there, both coming out of LA, the Go-Go's, who were really the first successful all-female new wave band featuring Belinda Carlisle. Their big album, #1 in 1981, was Beauty and the Beat. And the big single, #2 single for that was We Got the Beat. Belinda Carlisle likes to tell the story of how they were on tour opening for the Police. And as We Got the Beat kept going up and up the charts, the Police hit, I forget what it was at the time, was at the top of the charts, and they were sort of way down. And as the tour continued, they passed the Police tune on the way down as theirs was on the way up, and she talks about how that was a little awkward to be the opening band and to have a hit that was higher on the charts at the time than the group you were opening for, than the headliner. Another group out of LA, the Bangles, featuring Susanna Hoffs on guitar and vocals. The album from 1986, Different Light. So this is a couple years certainly after Beauty and the Beat. This album, Different Light, was a #2 hit here, #3 in the UK. Interestingly, had a song on it called Manic Monday, a #2 hit both here in the UK and in 1986, and written by somebody by the name of Christopher. But it turns out Christopher was just a pen name for Prince. This was Prince farming out yet more of his music to provide a #2 hit for the Bangles with Manic Monday. Probably the song that's remembered, maybe because in many ways it's a bit of a novelty song in a certain sense, is the song Walk Like an Egyptian from 1986, a #1 hit on the pop charts here, #3 in the UK, and a video that went with it. A very catchy tune, that one, Walk Like an Egyptian. If there was any female artist that really challenged Madonna on the MTV airwaves, in addition to, say, Janet Jackson, who we've talked about before, it's Cyndi Lauper out of Queens in New York City. Her album from 1983, She's So Unusual, and get that date, 1983, that's before the big Like a Virgin album that Madonna brought out. She's So Unusual went to #4, that one did in 1983, and had lots of hits on it, 4 of them. Girls Just Want to Have Fun, #2, Time After Time, #1, She Bop, a #3 song, interestingly enough, about female self-sexual pleasuring. And All Through the Night, a #5 song. I mentioned She Bop because remember that there was the big controversy around the Rolling Stones' I Can't Get No Satisfaction in 1965. So She Bop, to a certain extent, is a kind of female take on at least what I Can't Get No Satisfaction was reputed to be about, even if it really wasn't. So Cyndi Lauper all over MTV, especially with that song Girls Just Want to Have Fun. Golly, you practically couldn't turn on MTV without seeing that video. She continues to have success in the 1980s, with 1986 with the album True Colors. The album only gets to 14, but it's got the song True Colors, a #1 hit, and Change of Heart, a #3 hit. So for a while there, Cyndi Lauper and Madonna, pretty neck and neck in terms of who would be thought of as sort of the most, in 1985, 1986, if you've been trying to figure out who the most important female artist on MTV was, it'd be pretty close competition between Cyndi Lauper and Madonna. Of course, Janet Jackson doesn't really enter the fray until the next year. But between that and the presence of the Go-Go's and the Bangles, we're seeing a lot more women participating in rock culture than we've seen up to this point. Now, those who are cynical might say, well, yeah, that's what you get when it's primarily visual, because most people, most guys at least, would rather see a woman singing than a man singing. Well, that may be part of it, but still, it's important that these women are not only involved in the business, they're more than just eye candy for the guys. These are women who are taking control of their own music and their own careers, and they're serving as an example for future generations. For example, the female singer-songwriters that arise in the 90s, as women who can be in control of music and the popular music business and aren't just the pawns or the front persons for male-dominated musical enterprises. We should also say about Cyndi Lauper that she has had some really fantastic recent success doing the music for a Broadway musical called Kinky Boots, which has won many Tony Awards, and so has really brought her sort of at this late stage of her career all new acclaim with a Broadway musical for which she has written all the music. Well, let's turn our attention to a different group of maybe more mainstream artists that were part of the MTV scene in the 1980s. We'll call this the New Traditionalists and the continuation of New Wave.